Brandon Sanderson has not been defied often in living memory. In fact, some say that when Fourth Wing surpassed Words of Radiance on Goodreads in terms of ratings, the spite of his fans alone drove it back down into its place. Now, I admit I can't prove whether or not that story is true, but I do know that Brandon Sanderson fans are as likely to do that as they are to hunt Rebecca Yarros down and mount her head on a spike. The internet loves his books and has for a long time. The Cosmere, the universe that a lot of Brandon Sanderson's books are set in, is a trad fantasy dream, and at its center, in turn, is the Mistborn trilogy. The first book, The Final Empire, came out in 2006 when I was too young to read it. I'm not going to tell you just how young, don't want to make it that easy on the Cosmerenouts now. But it did stick around and continued to appear on must-read lists and, more importantly, writing advice forums for years to come until I finally had the honor of coming across it. Wait, where's that music coming from? It was mid. It was on the bad side of okay. It was assigned reading at school, but your teacher self-published his memoirs type of stuff. And I'm not exaggerating, because it wasn't irredeemable shit. It was irredeemably forgettable. And just maybe, that's worse. It probably isn't worse. But let me explain. In the prologue, we start the book with our protagonist, Kelsier, who forces a bunch of plantation slaves into rebellion by killing all their masters and leaving them to deal with the consequences. Chapter 1. We meet Vin, a young thief on the streets of... No, I'm not kidding, that's what he does! Kelsier is the most interesting character to Brandon Sanderson, and he's just such a phenomenon for reasons that are shockingly unrelated to what I just told you. But we'll get back to that. Chapter 1. We meet Vin, a young thief on the streets of Luthadel, who we are expected to believe is the protagonist. Evidence outweighs Brandon Sanderson's testimony on that one, so we'll just call her the point of view character. Vin is a member of the Ska. The Ska are a different social class from the nobility, but in the book they're basically treated as a different species. I don't think they're ever established to be actually physically different, but they are viewed differently. Vin's whole deal is that she used to have an older brother who used to hit her all the time and tell her that he was going to betray her like everybody else in the world will. And then eventually, supposedly, he did. So now Vin is stuck with Cuckbrecker and his extremely forgettable criminals. Extremely forgettable criminals is, I think, the central theme of this work. Vin is one of the very few Ska who can do allomancy, which is metal magic, basically. She's not fully aware of this, though, and almost gets herself captured and killed by a member of the fantasy police when she uses her powers on him. Why is she not aware of what allomancy is and that she can do it, even though it's kind of the main weapon of the nobility and not rare among them, and she's established to have a grasp on the world she lives in? Anyway, she's rescued by Kelsier and his extremely forgettable criminals. He explains to Vin that she's special because, like him, she can use all the allomancy abilities and not just one, making her a Mistborn, and therefore she has value to him. So he makes her part of the crew. He explains to her that he wants to overthrow the Lord Ruler. The Lord Ruler is this kind of shadow entity, god, emperor situation. He is faceless, ageless, immoral, and holds up the status quo that oppresses the Ska. He does have a name. It's revealed at the end of the book, and I don't care. Kelsier begins training Vin. This is where we get a grasp on how allomancy actually works. You swallow a specific type of metal, and then in your body you can burn it and trigger a specific magical effect depending on the metal you consumed. The most prominently featured ones are pushing and pulling, wherein a user pushes or pulls a piece of metal towards themselves or away from them, and if they have enough leverage, they can even push or pull themselves. It's why so much fan art is set on rooftops. It's how Mistborn shoot coins and hop around all over the city. They can do emotional allomancy, i.e. making someone more passionately emotional or soothing their emotions down. They can detect metals, they can hide themselves from other allomancers, they can even mess around with time to a limited degree. The way that this is set up is good. It's a nice, understandable, hard magic system. If you've heard of Mistborn before, there's a good chance you came across that term, hard magic system. It's what we use to describe the way in which magic appears in stories if it has especially tight rules and the reader has a really good grasp on those rules. The opposite of this is obviously a soft magic system, a magic system that's more vague, less strict, or just less clear. Think Poppy War, The Hobbit, so this is how you lose the Time War. When it comes to discussions about this, people cannot shut the fuck up about Brandon Sanderson. They say that allomancy is so cool and such a hard magic system and that he's the boss music inducing daddy of wizards. And I get that that's what it looks like on the surface. You know what you can do with what resources. They are strictly categorized and you know exactly what will happen when said resources run out. But here is my list of problems I have with Brandon Sanderson and his magic. First of all, it's not that hard. I've seen harder. The body strengthening magic thing is severely overused. They do what's called Peter dragging all the time, even though it's established to be bad for you over and over, and the consequences are rarely that crazy. So it inevitably also brings up the question, why don't they do it more often? No one in the world seems to be adjusted to the magic existing, even though from what we can tell, it's existed since anyone can remember. We know that the guards of some noble houses have arrows without metal arrowheads so they can't be pushed from their trajectory, and that some Mistborn carry glass knives for that same purpose. But also, every NPC guard is wearing metal armor, which, yeah, is ruthlessly used against them all the fucking time. I get that there's other crime, but the Ska are established to be mostly harmless to the nobility. They are repeatedly referred to as beaten down, unmotivated, and inherently disinterested in agency over their own lives. They're also superstitiously afraid of the mist that comes out into the streets of Luthadel every night. I don't know, they don't like the fog. Now, allomantic abilities, even the normal singular ones, are extremely rare among them. Some people have rightfully pointed out that Brandon Sanderson is flying a little close to the race metaphor sun here, but the situation is complicated by the fact that the Lord Ruler apparently uses soothing allomancy on the Ska to keep them complacent on like a large scale, and that people might have allomantic abilities that would only unlock if they were in mortal danger, so I resolved not to pass judgment here. But the noble houses have allomancy, famously, and house wars aren't rare in Luthadel. The nobility has every reason to defend against Mistborn, and yet the poorly defined, kind of under-described time period is chock full of metal everywhere. Everybody wears jewelry, at least rings and bracelets, because they're trying to emulate the Lord Ruler. Remember that for later. Now, jewelry can't be pushed or pulled if it goes through your body at any point, except for when it can, which is dumb, because why would 3 millimeters of healed skin stop magic from functioning? The human body is technically all exterior from mouth to anus. Metal you swallow is kind of inside of you, but not on the inside of your flesh, so how does that work? An allomancer should be able to pull on a ring, but what if I do this? So the Cosmere magic system, so hard at first glance, runs into problems eventually. This is not unusual. Every magic system in every story ever falls apart if you squint at it too hard, because magic doesn't exist, yo. Some part of it is always going to be inexplicable. But that's not what I dislike about allomancy. Any magic system ever does not matter as much to the quality of a story as Brandon Sanderson fans would have you believe. It's why soft magic systems don't ruin stories. It's not about the magic, it's about the people. And I don't care if you only read for escapism. Magic is, at its best, a tool to tell a story. A flourish in a world that translates into a power structure. It still needs an interesting narrative, and it still needs interesting people to use it. Brandon Sanderson doesn't make his characters or his plotline nearly interesting enough, and so, even in positive reviews, they're overshadowed by his magic system. I will die on this hill. And he doesn't even stick to that. He ends the final empire with Vin magic's harder than the bad guy, for mysterious reasons. But we'll get to that. Kelsier decides that starting an upright... Jesus Christ. That starting an upright... Kelsier decides that starting a house war between the noble houses of Luthadel will be beneficial to the uprising, so he makes Vin infiltrate the high class. She takes on the identity of Lady Valette Renault, niece of Lord Renault, who is in turn a shapeshifter under Kelsier's command, who took some dead guy's place after eating his corpse. Charming. Anyway, Lord Renault is perfectly chill around Vin as she starts learning the ways of a country Nepo baby. At her side is Sazed. Sazed is another member of Kelsier's crew who is supposed to act as Vin's steward and keep her out of trouble at official functions. He is a terraceman. A terraceman is a man from Terrace. Brandon Sanderson's explanation is not superior to this one, but the terracemen are known to have a magic called phorochemy, which is separate from allomancy. It also uses metals, but as a storage unit rather than a consumable object. So instead of swallowing and burning a certain metal, they wear it on their body like jewelry and store things like knowledge, power, etc. in it to use at a later time. Sazed is sort of interesting. I think as a character he's okay, he's alright. Quality-wise, vaguely on line with the rest of them, but his own views of what and who he is are a little out there at times.
Quite all right, Renault said. He's really not my steward, but yours. Actually, Kelsier said, I don't think he's anybody's steward anymore. Eh, Sazed? Sazed cocked his head.
A terraceman without a master is like a soldier with no weapon, Master Kelsier. I have enjoyed my time attending to Lord Renault, as I am certain that I shall enjoy returning to your service. But, Vin said frowning, you're a rebel, Sazed. You're fighting the Lord Ruler. I am something of a deviant, Sazed said.
And my people are not as completely subjugated as the Lord Ruler would believe, I think. We hide keepers beneath his very eyes, and some of us even gather the courage to break our training. He paused, then shook his head.
It is not an easy thing, however. We are a weak people, mistress. We are eager to do as we are told, quick to seek subjugation. Even I, whom you dub a rebel, immediately sought out a position of stewardship and subservience. We are not so brave as we would wish, I think. You were brave enough to save me, Vin said. Sazed smiled. Ah, but there was an element of obedience in that too. I promised Master Kelsier that I would see to your safety. I don't know about that. I truly don't. Kelsier does politely protest his status as superior to Sazed every now and again, and there is an explanation as to why the terracemen are described this way. You know, being purposefully raised that way, collective trauma and all that, but I don't. Love to see biology butting in there. Mind those wax wings, Brandon. On to cheerier topics. What follows is the lengthy yassification of Vin. She gets schooled about the noble houses of Luthadel, she gets a fun new haircut, and she is ready to mingle with the nobility. Vin attends a ball for the very first time. And something happens. I would like to read it out to you. Now see, here's the problem with going to refill your cup of wine. The sudden voice made Vin jump, and she spun. A young man stood behind her.
The problem is, the young man said, you return to find that your favorite spot has been stolen by a pretty girl. Now, a gentleman would move on to another place, leaving the lady to her contemplations. However, this is the best spot on the balcony. It's the only place close enough to a lantern to have good reading light. Vin flushed. I'm sorry, my lord. I see, now I feel guilty. All for a cup of wine. Look, there's plenty of room for two people here. Just scoot over a bit.
Vin stood for a moment, watching him, but he seemed completely absorbed. He didn't even pause to look up at her. Isn't he going to pay me any attention at all? Vin thought, puzzled at her own annoyance. Maybe I should have worn a fancier dress. The man sipped at his wine, focused on the book. Do you always read at balls? She asked. The young man looked up. Whenever I can get away with it. Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of coming? Vin asked. Elland raised an eyebrow. You're not going to let me get back to my book, are you? I wasn't intending to.
He sighed, tucking the book back into his jacket pocket, which was beginning to show signs of book-shaped wear.
Well then, do you want to go dance instead? Vin froze. Elland smiled nonchalantly. Holy shit. Do you think they're gonna fall in love? This is where the element of subjectivity comes in. Because I'm well aware that there must have been a time when this character dynamic was revolutionary. But reading it today, the knowledge that the sexily disheveled emo rich boy reading at a party and the uncertain yet overpowered female protagonist are going to have a snarky love story is so predominant, I can't focus on anything else. There is not one person my age who takes even a passing interest in books and couldn't tell you where this is going in embarrassing detail based on like 2 paragraphs. I remember when Seraph of the End came out. Spoilers for Seraph of the End, by the way. And I took one look at this soft-spoken prop of a best friend character, and I knew that he had to die early on, probably in an inspirational, self-sacrificial way, and that he would probably be revealed to not actually have died for plot twist reasons. I shit you not, I predicted that in Anime Club, and every person in attendance was pissed at me because they thought I had actually seen it before and was spoiling it on purpose. It's been a long time since I've gotten to brag about anime knowledge. It felt cool at the time. Either way, not even Seraph of the End was this predictable, and again, I'm sure it didn't used to be. The reason it's become formulaic is almost certainly because other people emulated Brandon Sanderson and not the other way around. But with every trope, if you view it outside of being a trope, you can still tell whether it works or not. Enemies to Lovers is overdone, but if you read an Enemies to Lovers book and it entertains you, then who cares, right? Seraph of the End still had its main character go through trials and tribulations and weapon foraging. Okay, look, I didn't rewatch it. I only know that it entertained me even though I knew where it was going, and that it got like crazy close to being gay, which was huge for 2015 me. Anyway, Vin and Elend aren't an interesting character dynamic. They're a sequence of events, and it plays out exactly how you think it will. Also, Elend just means misery in German. Cyrus is moving around. Also, there's a fun little age gap. Elend is 21, Vin is at most 17. Not a huge fan of that, although I'm not that bothered by it. The defenses that Brandon Sanderson fans will conjure for this are honestly more entertaining than the book itself. If 21 to 17 makes you cringe, I suggest never looking into history before like 2003. I'm sure that'll hold up in court. If age gaps make you cringe, I suggest never looking into history before like 2003. If public beheadings make you cringe, I suggest never looking into if slavery makes you cringe. The middle of the book is a mixed bag of plot points. While Vin is getting settled in the high life, Kelsier and the gang are working on a plan to get Kelsier's brother to infiltrate the fantasy police. They're building an army. They're also manipulating a bunch of ska with allomancy to get them to rebel. You find that morally questionable? Try not to. Kelsier and Vin go break into the Lord Ruler's palace for reasons I genuinely cannot remember. I think Kelsier just wants to break in somewhere. Vin follows him and convinces him to let her tag along. Horrible decision. They're attacked immediately. Vin almost dies and Kelsier is super injured. This has no consequences whatsoever, except some dusty book that Sazed finds when he saves Vin. It's a journal assumed to belong to the Lord Ruler himself, and it details his journey to gain ultimate power. We, the reader, get snippets of the journal just above the beginning of every chapter, which is neat, though not diverting. At some point, Vin returns to the balls and continues getting closer to Ellen, who is enchanted by how much she isn't like other girls. Kelsier pretends to be a ska informant for the nobility to help stir shit up. He also gets a cult following for being the survivor. A few years back, he got sent to these metal mining pits by the Lord Ruler as a punishment. Yeah, the army of Ska gets slaughtered before it can do anything of importance. Elend breaks up with Vin because he catches wind of some of her shady dealings. That same night, a noble Mistborn called Shun Alariel decides to go kill Elend as tensions between the noble houses continue to rise. Despite the breakup, Vin goes and kills her in defense of Elend, finally kicking off the house war for real. Kelsier's brother presumably is killed by the fantasy police, but he's later revealed to be fine. Each event that I just listed is individually quite interesting to read about. I want that on the record. When I reread some of the singular parts of this book in preparation for this video, I ended up reading Vin's fight with Sean Alariel and her emotional outburst after she wins for much longer than I'd originally planned. Sanderson cuts out a lot of the narration he tends to do when he's in an action scene, so it's pretty well done. It's exciting. But I feel like very technical qualities, like the mechanics of a fight scene, don't really make up for what the book is lacking. I want to propose another comparison. Six of Crows is a beloved young adult heist novel just a few books beneath Words of Radiance on Goodreads. In my opinion, Six of Crows as a book is superior to The Final Empire, even though comparatively its plot is trash. Hear me out. In Six of Crows, the goal is to break into an insanely secure government facility. The plan for doing this is stupid and relies on random luck. And when it inevitably fails, it's random luck that saves the cast. If somebody just recited to me what happens in Six of Crows, I'd have to conclude that the book sucks. But it doesn't, because the unbelievable problems and twists the characters encounter are, first and foremost, character moments. They add to who these people are, how they see the world, and how they interact with it. They explore backgrounds, further relationships. The thing that Brandon Sanderson keeps neglecting to do in The Final Empire, even though he definitely gives himself the chance to do it. Instead, we get scenes upon scenes of Dox and Spook and Hammond and all the other background flunkies who are so impressed with Kelsier, they just gotta throw away their life for him. I respect that Sanderson is trying to depict the different sides and elements and facets of rebellion, a la, oh, the world doesn't revolve around our main characters, look at all these other people. Some of them don't have faith in what's happening. Some of them are scared. But because none of these background characters are actually interesting, Sanderson ends up sacrificing way more pages to them than he can afford to. So we're left with all of this set dressing that's only occasionally broken up by action, or deep talks where our characters are spelling out what they're feeling and thinking. Characterization is never as effortless as in Six of Crows, because in that book, you hardly notice that it's happening. In Sock, there's action always. It just happens to be action that makes you think about the characters in a new way. Sometimes there's exposition-heavy flashbacks, but they're mostly just triggered by what's relevant right now, and due to the fact that they're flashbacks, we get to focus on the most important parts and then return to action when they're done immediately. In The Final Empire, a lot of characterization is done through narration or pretty obvious dialogue. When the unnecessarily padded cast comes together to make plans, it feels more like they're making a list together than having a conversation. In this book, Brandon Sanderson is doing one thing with some effort, while Leigh Bardugo is doing three things at once and giving an inspirational speech in a handstand. And I'm aware that this book wasn't written for my generation. Maybe it's my short attention span that just couldn't keep up with the filler chapters. But I do genuinely believe that The Final Empire would have been vastly improved if Brandon Sanderson had just cut 10 to 20% of it out and maybe didn't include 3 or 4 of the named side characters. But back to the plot. As discussed, things aren't going great. The fake-out death of Kelsier's brother makes him return to those mines he was sent to as a punishment, and he destroys all of the sources of the metal, so the stuff that the prisoners are supposed to mine there will not grow for a long time. Following this, a bunch of random ska are sentenced to death. I'm not sure if it's a direct consequence of what Kelsier did, or just some intimidation tactic. Either way, he's having none of it. Kelsier attacks the fantasy police, and the Lord Ruler shows up in the flesh. He turns out to be just some guy, but even later in the book it's revealed that he's actually Terrisman. I don't know if that serves any narrative purpose aside from having him wear his weakness literally on his sleeve. Be that as it may, he kills Kelsier, and shit, I did not see that coming, I will say. On one hand, I couldn't imagine Brandon Sanderson letting Kelsier go with anything except a bang, but on the other, the plot armor that's existed for every injury for the main characters up to this point just falls away. I think this is really the moment when so many people actually fell in love with Mistborn. The tension rises, the what if the bad guy wins atmosphere that the book was set to have the entire time suddenly sets in. It is a drastic rise, followed by a steep fall. But before then, the shapeshifter, who was actually Lord Renault, takes Kelsier's corpse and impersonates him to a bunch of ska. So now he's a martyr who's risen from the dead. With Kelsier's aforementioned status as the subject of a cult, this finally inspires rebellion in the ska. Hello, Joy from the future here. The audio footage for the next couple of minutes has ceased to exist. I don't know why. But worry not, my sweet little donkey foal, for I will reenact the missing pieces for you faithfully. Vin goes to attack the heart of the Final Empire. That's what the nation is called, by the way. It's just the Final Empire. And gets truly wrecked. The Lord Ruler is able to affect the metals within her body, and also glass, because power? Struggling for her life, Vin puts together that the Lord Ruler is a talisman, and that the journal she's been reading about a man's journey for ultimate power was not actually about him, but about another guy, and that the Lord Ruler interrupted this journey to take power for himself, because the Lord Ruler is a talisman, and they were oppressed even back then, and he didn't want to be oppressed anymore. So he took power and made all of his people slaves. I am holding on to hope that I misinterpreted that bit. Maybe it's so that nobody will understand his power, but like, Forakemi is not a secret or anything. Terraceman stewards are pretty standard for the high noble houses. At least the foreshadowing for the journal reveal was there. The excerpts, combined with a few strategic mentions within the story contents, make it perfectly plausible that the Lord Ruler was really some guy, rather than some other guy that happens to have been involved in something we don't know what it was, and also some other guy who's never named. Okay. I struggle to connect what the Lord Ruler did thousands of years ago with the current narrative. Like, what was that twist for? What assumption is being contradicted here? Because we know that the Lord Ruler is not an especially nice person. We've known for a while. Sanderson just switched the name tags of two ancient book characters within his book. It does not feel like this makes the Lord Ruler more of a character. He's still just personified evil, and there's nothing wrong with that. Personified evil can be a fine antagonist. I guess it would have mattered less to me if the protagonists going up against him were at all more likable. I'll talk in a second about why that connection wasn't there for me. But first, the grand finale.
Vin stoked her iron, concentrating, pushing it as hard as she could. She kept her Peter flared, struggling to keep from being crushed, and she knew somehow that she was no longer breathing. The force pushing against her was too strong. She couldn't get her chest to go up and down.
Mist spun around her, dancing because of her allomancy. She was dying. She knew it. She could barely even feel the pain anymore. She was being crushed, suffocated. She drew upon the mists. 2 new lines appeared. She screamed, pulling with a strength she had never known before. The goal of the narrative was to defeat the Lord Ruler. Cosmere Jesus died to make it happen, and you pull a discovered a new type of magic in the final battle? God damn it. This is worse than the power of friendship. This is worse than the heart of the cards. This is worse than the magic of love. This is pulled straight out of Brandon Sanderson's ass. And by God, it should have just stayed there. I get that this is a trilogy. I get that you need to leave out information to make readers curious, but not like this. Pick literally any other element than the thing that defeats your main villain in your 600-page story to be mysterious? Anything. Here's my suggestion. Omit the explanation for why Kelsier reappears to the Ska. Make Lord Renault disappear at some point, rightfully assumed to have fled Luthadel after shit hit the fan. Make the crew wonder if maybe Kelsier did escape with his life, or if the Ska are imagining things in their desperation for hope that he kindled within them, because it doesn't matter if he's truly dead. The symbol lives on. Boom! Mystery, intrigue, a well-paying trilogy, and you can leave your magic system wrecking, draw power from a damp weather phenomenon as twist away. It's not good. It's not good. It's not a worthy end to the story you wrote. It's not a worthy end to the magic system you came up with. It deserves better. And yes, I know there's an explanation for what the fuck this is supposed to mean in the rest of the trilogy, somewhere. At least I should hope there is. But whatever it is, whatever information we're lacking, for this ending to be satisfying, nothing can change the fact that it belongs in this book instead. The ending of the final empire cannot be redeemed by what comes after. And the very existence of the rest of the trilogy is proof of the Cosmerenouts' dedication. The Final Empire is about Kelsier. A lot of the book covers that I could find have Vin on them, but she's really just a lens for the reader to look at Kelsier through. You know how in Sherlock Holmes novels, Sherlock is not the point of view character, because if he were, we'd be privy to his thought process, and we'd know how he solves the crime, and the book wouldn't be interesting anymore. That is what Watson is for. He presents the reader with all the facts, and we can guess along as the story unfolds. And eventually, at its end, Sherlock reveals what the answer is. Brandon Sanderson wants Kelsier to be the protagonist of Mistborn, but he can't just show the story from his perspective, because every now and again, Kelsier disappears, or picks random fights, or does something we're not supposed to know about yet, and all the tension would disappear if we were outright told what he was doing. Kelsier can't be adequately cool if we're told about Kelsier by Kelsier. We need a second pair of eyes to marvel at him from afar, and that's what Vin is for. Huge chunks of her first POV chapters are dedicated to how cool Kelsier is, to how powerful he is, and what his plan might be, and how he's so much nicer than any man she's ever met before. Stuff that would sound incredibly arrogant if Sando wrote it from his perspective. It's also why I buy Kelsier's hero sacrifice. There's no way to give a character like him a reasonable epilogue. He can't settle down. He is James Bond. He's Ash Ketchum. He's Ethan Hunt. He's just too shiny. I actually adore this type of character as an antagonist because it's such an interesting fall to watch. Think Homelander from The Boys or Coronabeth Tridentarius from the Locked Tomb series. They're just perfect and blonde and perfectly blonde, but just underneath the surface you see how messed up these characters are, maybe precisely because nobody can sustain being that perfect all the time. And it's been a long time since I've come across a character whose creator isn't aware of that. Even Kelsier's character flaws aren't flaws. He cares too much. He's just too passionate about the freedom of the Ska. He makes too many lighthearted jokes. He can't help but love his dead wife, even though he suspects she betrayed him. He kind of thinks that he's better than other Ska just because he objectively is. The only real flaw he has, that's pointed out by Sanderson himself, is Kelsier's disdain for the nobility. He thinks they can all go die, which is, I don't want to say reasonable, but he's still like a guy reacting to oppression, so I don't know, I'll take it. Kelsier's saving grace is that Brandon Sanderson isn't actually so attached to him that he would let him live. His death and the thought process behind it and what it inspires make a lot of sense for the character, and I can appreciate that even if I'm not crazy about the character. Plus, a funny side effect of Kelsier's death is that Vin gets enough POV chapters to kind of develop a personality. I don't really care for her love story. I don't care for her growing into femininity or discovering her Mary Sue-ish powers. But Sanderson does stick to his decision to make her nervous and suspicious very consistently. That part of her character keeps coming up in what I feel are pretty organic situations. She's a little boring for my tastes, but fine in comparison to your usual pair of binoculars. I think what bothers me most about characterization in this book in general is that whenever it happens, it's the current point of view character holding still and just kind of thinking about a different character for a few paragraphs straight. And I think it adds negatively to the way that this book feels like it's heavily padded. Final Empire truly did not need to be the length that it is, which is a shame because underneath it all is the skeleton of a really clever plot. If you summarized it to me, I'd say it sounds like a 5-star read. But because of the padding, the weak characterization, and the unfaithfulness to the magic system that is built up to be so important, the Final Empire doesn't reach its full potential while still not being bad enough for me to really trash it on here. And negative reviews are always popular. Just look what you've done, Brandon! In all sincerity, I think that a lot of the flaws that I perceive in the Final Empire are just marks of unperfected craft. Not trusting your readers with subtlety is a extremely common critique that beginner writers get. I should know. But as an amateur, I should also know that there's a lot more in terms of magic systems than what writing forums would have you believe. For instance, if you're looking at a really rock-hard magic system that pulls through to the end of the story, take a look at Rune Lords by David Farland. I read The Sum of All Men in preparation for a Q&A with him I was lucky enough to attend before he suddenly and tragically passed away. His own endorsement for Brandon Sanderson in The Final Empire actually summarizes a lot of my feelings really well. Brandon Sanderson is the real thing. An exciting storyteller with a unique and powerful vision. I think the vision is undoubtedly here. I know Brandon Sanderson can file his craft into something truly incredible, and I know because he has. This is Tress of the Emerald Sea. Tress of the Emerald Sea fucks. The book is everything Mistborn wishes it were, but also middle grade. It has a likable female protagonist who has rapid yet lovely and believable character development, a nice magic system that doesn't choke the characters. Brando even solves his problem of too many side characters by having a full ship of people just be called Doug. The characters still aren't crazy three-dimensional, and the narration is still a little too much for my taste. But this time, it feels like he put so much of it in because he genuinely enjoys doing it. Because it's fun for him to write. I have it on my phone, I'm gonna get it for you. It's gonna take me a second. I do have it marked in the book. He bulged with muscles to the point that when he lifted his arm to wave, Tress swore she could hear the seams on his shirt begging for mercy. This young man was around the same age as Charlie, but he was 6.5 feet tall and had a jaw so straight it made other men question if they were. This is so out of place! Get him, Brandon! He's an excellent fencer, the Duke continued, and responds to questions with single-sentence answers, sometimes using only one word. Also, he's a war hero. He lost 10,000 men at the Battle of Lake Privy. It just feels like he's really cutting loose, and I'm sure not all of his newer stuff is this comedic and lighthearted, but it feels like a real step up from 2006. And it somehow also takes place in the Cosmere. There's like side characters from Mistborn in there, which I begrudgingly tolerate. They even mention Sazed. I think he's like relevant now. Anyway, my faith in Brandon Sanderson is going strong. Although I do think that the Final Empire is overhyped, I get it when people say they like Mistborn, and I'm seriously considering eventually taking a look at Stormlight Archive, because the fan art just goes hard, so we'll see how that goes. Until then, I'm sorry, Mr. Sanderson, and thank you for sticking around.